You've probably noticed it 100 times. You sit down to eat, and within seconds, your dog is just there. Quiet. Still. Watching you with those patient eyes that somehow make you feel like you owe them something. And you've probably thought, they just want my food. But here's what's actually happening. Your dog isn't watching your plate. They're watching you. Specifically, the version of you that only appears at meal times. The relaxed jaw, the soft eyes, the shoulders that finally drop. Research confirms that dogs can read human micro-expressions with remarkable precision, and the face you wear when you eat, it's one of their favorites. There's also something much older going on, something rooted in pack behavior, in attachment science, and in the very first bond your dog ever formed in their life. In this video, I'll walk you through 7 things your dog is actually communicating when they sit at your feet during a meal. By the end, you'll understand what they're really asking, and you'll know exactly how to answer them with or without sharing your dinner. Welcome to Perfect Living, where we discuss everything about dogs. Now let's get into it. Let's start with something most owners get completely wrong, and it's not their fault, because what they're seeing looks obvious. You sit down with your plate, your dog appears, and they're still. Not jumping, not whining, just sitting there, perfectly composed, eyes locked on your fork like they're watching a very important film. And almost every owner in that moment thinks the same thing. My dog is hungry, or my dog wants what I have. Or teats, if you've had a particularly long day. My dog is quietly judging me for having dessert. But watch more carefully next time, because there are actually 2 completely different things that can look identical in that moment. And they mean entirely different things about what your dog needs from you. When a dog is genuinely hungry, when their body is telling them they need food, their behavior has a particular quality to it. There's a restlessness. They shift their weight, they lick their lips. They might glance at their bowl, then back at you. They may paw at your leg or let out a soft whine. Their energy is unsettled because the signal inside them is unsettled. Hunger is a physical urgency, and it moves through the body that way. But the dog who sits down and simply watches, who is almost eerily calm, who could be mistaken for a very attentive statue. That dog is running something entirely different. Something that has nothing to do with an empty stomach. What you're seeing is a behavior that predates your kitchen, your dinner table, your house. By about 40,000 years, dogs evolved alongside humans who cooked over open fires and left scraps. For millennia, the survival strategy wasn't to chase or hunt, it was to wait patiently near the humans who had food. That stillness you're looking at isn't patience in the way we think of it, it's a program. An ancient, deeply embedded ritual that fires automatically the moment you sit down with something to eat. Here's where most owners go wrong. They see the stillness and they either ignore it because the dog isn't being disruptive, or they eventually cave and toss something over because the quiet staring starts to feel, honestly, a little intense. Neither response is wrong exactly, but neither is informed. When you understand that your still watching dog isn't in distress, isn't starving, isn't making a demand, they are simply completing a ritual that their nervous system considers completely normal. Something shifts. You stop feeling guilty. You stop feeling manipulated. You can simply be present with them in that moment without the low-level emotional negotiation most of us are running without even noticing. The practical gift here is this. If your dog is still and calm at meal times, that's not a training problem. It doesn't need to be fixed. It needs to be understood. And once you understand it, the whole energy of the meal changes for both of you. Now, which brings us to something that explains why your dog shows up so reliably every single time before you've even picked up your fork. Think about your day from your dog's point of view for a moment. You wake up, you move around the house, you disappear into the bathroom, you come back, you sit on the couch, you get up, you go to another room, you leave the house entirely, sometimes for hours, and from your dog's perspective, there is no explanation for where you went or when you're coming back. Your schedule, the thing that feels perfectly logical and structured to you, looks, from the other side, genuinely unpredictable. Dogs are extraordinarily attuned to their owners' movements. Research on canine attachment consistently shows that dogs monitor their primary caregiver's location, proximity, and availability throughout the day. And unlike human children who develop an understanding of permanence, the knowledge that someone who leaves will come back, dogs remain wired to track presence. So your dog, at some point in their day, is doing a version of this. Where are they? Are they reachable? Are they going to move again? This is not anxiety in every dog. In many, it's simply the background hum of attachment, but it is constant, except at mealtime. Mealtime, for most dogs with consistent owners, is the one appointment in the entire day that never changes. Around the same time in the same place, the most important person in their world sits down and stays still for 20, sometimes 30 minutes. You don't leave. You don't disappear behind a door. You're not on the move. You are simply reliably there. And for a creature whose emotional equilibrium is tied to your proximity, that moment is not just about food. It is the most predictable point of safety in the entire day. This is why so many dogs materialize the instant you sit down, often before you've touched anything on your plate, sometimes before the food is even fully prepared. They're not reacting to the smell of dinner. They've learned that your sitting means you're staying, and your staying is what they've been waiting for. Most owners, when they recognize this, feel two things at once: a little sad and a little more tender about the whole thing. Because what you realize is that what looks like food-seeking behavior is often just a dog saying, "Finally, you're still, and I want to be near you while you are." The practical implication here is surprisingly simple. If you spend even 10 seconds before you sit down to eat, acknowledging your dog, and a calm word, a brief touch, letting them settle near you, you're not reinforcing begging. You're completing the arrival. You're saying, "Yes, I'm here, it's all fine. You can relax." And a dog who receives that acknowledgement is almost always calmer and less persistent throughout the meal. Not because you've distracted them from the food, but because the thing they actually came for, your presence, has already been confirmed. What comes next is the point I find people find most surprising, and it involves something you do at every meal without ever thinking about it, something your dog notices and responds to more than almost anything else in the room. Here's a question worth sitting with. When did your dog last see your face fully relaxed? Not the face you wear when you're working, not the one you have on when you're in traffic, or on your phone, or moving through the 100 small logistics of a day. The genuinely soft, off-duty version of your face, jaw loose, eyes calm, the slight ease that comes when you taste something you like. When did your dog last see that version of you? And for how long? For most dogs, the answer is at meal times and occasionally in the evenings. Because the rest of the day, most owners, without realizing it, are wearing a face their dog has learned to read as busy, watchful, slightly tense. And dogs, it turns out, are extraordinarily good readers of human faces, not in a vague, general sense. Studies from researchers at the University of Veterinary Medicine in Vienna, and separately from teams at Asabu University in Japan, they have demonstrated that dogs can distinguish between specific human emotional expressions with a level of accuracy that surprised even the scientists running the trials. They are not just reading obvious signals like screaming or laughing, they are reading the fine grain, the small softening around the eyes, the the relaxed set of the jaw, the shoulders dropping 1/4 of an inch. Your dog has been building a catalogue of your face since the day they came home. They know your tired face, your worried face, your about to leave face. And they know the face you wear when you sit down to eat, which for most people is one of the quietest, most unguarded expressions they wear all day. When your dog watches you eat, they are not, at least not primarily, watching your food. They are watching you. Eat the specific version of you that is softer, stiller, less armored. And for a dog whose emotional world orbits around your state of being, getting to observe that version of you is genuinely meaningful. Now here's where the application piece gets interesting, because the reverse is also true. Research on the mutual gaze bond between dogs and owners, including landmark work by Takefumi Nagasawa and colleagues published in Science, found that sustained, warm eye contact between dogs and their owners produces an oxytocin release in both the human and the dog, the same neurochemical loop that bonds mothers and infants. And it can be activated simply by looking at your dog with a soft, warm expression while they're watching you. Most owners, when their dog stares at them during a meal, to either avoid eye contact because they've been told it encourages begging, or they look back with an expression that's part amused, part exasperated, part guilty. But what would happen if, once during the meal, you simply look back at your dog with a genuinely warm expression and held it for 3 or 4 seconds, not handing over food, not making a big gesture, just returning the look? That small moment, repeated consistently, is one of the lowest effort, highest impact bonding practices you can build into a completely ordinary part of your day. Your dog came to the table to see your relaxed face. Show them it on purpose, just once, and the entire dynamic shifts. If this is already making you think differently about what happens at mealtimes with your dog, tap subscribe. Every week on Perfect Living, we go this deep. And you don't want to miss what's next. Now, this next one sounds a little wild at first, but stay with me, because once you see it, you genuinely can't unsee it. If you watch a group of wolves, nor really any social canid, during and immediately after a feeding, you'll notice something that isn't about eating at all. The lower-ranking members of the group position themselves near the feeding, not necessarily to steal food, but to observe, to take inventory, to confirm in a very real behavioral sense that the dominant member is well fed, that food exists, that the world is still operating as it should. Once that check is complete, once the information has registered, those animals settle. They lie down, they rest. Your dog is doing a version of this every single time you eat. And the stare that intensifies in the first few minutes of your meal then gradually softens as you continue eating, and often ends with your dog sighing and lying down nearby. That is not your dog giving up on getting a scrap. That is your dog completing what is essentially a safety check. Leader is eating, food is present, pack is intact, status normal. I can stand down. This matters enormously for how owners respond in those first few minutes. The instinct for many people, especially if they've been told not to feed their dog from the table, is to immediately redirect, remove, or correct the watching behavior right at the start of the meal. And here's what happens when you do that consistently. The check never completes. Your dog's nervous system is trying to confirm something, and you're interrupting the confirmation before it can land. So the behavior often escalates rather than resolving, not because the dog is being difficult, but because the signal they're trying to process keeps getting cut off before it finishes. The reframe here is gentle and practical. Let the first few minutes simply be. If your dog sits and watches at the start of a meal and you neither reward them nor make a scene about them, no food, but also no drama, most dogs will complete the check and settle on their own. If your dog watches for the entire meal and never settles, that's worth noticing. Not as a behavior problem, but as a possible signal of underlying anxiety that isn't about food at all. The meal is just the moment it becomes visible. Your dog's behavior during your meal times is, in this way, a quiet window into their broader emotional state. And learning to read that window, but rather than just trying to close it, gives you genuinely useful information about how your dog is doing on any given day. Speaking of reading behavior, the next point is one that tends to make people laugh because it turns out your dog has been paying more careful attention to your patterns than you ever paid to theirs. Your dog knows things about you that you have never consciously taught them. They know that on the evenings when you eat in front of the television, your defenses are lower. They know that breakfast is harder to get something from than dinner. They know which family member is most likely to cave at the table, and they will position themselves strategically near that person before the meal even starts. When they know that if they shift from direct eye contact to a soft, slightly tilted head, the probability of receiving something increases measurably, and if a gentle chin on the knee has ever worked even once, they have filed that away and they will deploy it again at exactly the right moment. This is not manipulation in any sinister sense. It is something closer to dedicated, longitudinal research. Your dog has run thousands of small experiments over the course of your life together. Tiny variations in position, timing, expression, proximity, and they have been paying close attention to the results. The specific way your dog looks at you during a meal is, in a very real sense, the outcome of years of behavioral data collection. It is the version of the approach that works on you, refined through repetition until it's almost perfectly calibrated. Psychologists call this variable reinforcement, and it's one of the most powerful learning mechanisms in any social animal. What makes it particularly potent isn't consistent reward, it's inconsistent reward. When your dog knows that sometimes the fork comes their way and sometimes it doesn't, the uncertainty itself becomes compelling. The behavior doesn't extinguish the way it would if the answer were always no. The occasional yes keeps the whole program running. Most owners, when they hear this, have one of two reactions: either mild indignation, wait, my dog has been studying me, or genuine affection, because the more you think about it, the more it reflects a dog who is deeply, carefully, attentively engaged with you. They didn't develop a sophisticated, personalized strategy for a person they were indifferent to. What to do with this practically is quite simple, and it doesn't require you to stop sharing your food if that's something you enjoy. It just requires consistency. Pick your approach, whatever it is, and apply it the same way every time, with the same emotional tone. If you're going to share something, make it a deliberate, calm gesture, the same gesture at the same point in the meal. If you're not going to share, let that be equally calm and equally consistent. What creates the intense, persistent, escalating version of mealtime watching isn't the sharing or the not sharing, it's the unpredictability. Remove the variable, and within a few weeks, most owners find the behavior settles into something much quieter and much easier to live with. Which leads us into something that sounds simple but is, I think, one of the most quietly important things in this whole video. Because it has nothing to do with food or training or reinforcement schedules, and everything to do with what your dog is actually looking for when they're in the room with you. There's a scene that plays out in homes everywhere. You take your plate to another room. Maybe you want some quiet. Maybe you're eating while working. And you close the door. And your dog sits outside that door and scratches once, twice. Maybe whines softly. And the easy interpretation is that they followed the food, that they want what's on the other side of the door. But consider this: if you put your dog's bowl in a room and close the door, they would probably not scratch to get in. The food alone doesn't produce that behavior. Would you produce that behavior? You specifically having a meal in a space your dog can't access. In wolf packs and in the behavior of dogs living in group settings, communal eating is not primarily about feeding, it is about membership. The act of being present during a meal, is of sharing the space while food is consumed, is how a social animal confirms that they are still part of the group. It is a belonging behavior, an identity behavior. When your dog stations themselves near you while you eat, some part of their ancient wiring is performing the most basic ritual their species has. I am here. I am with you. I belong. This is why the scratching at the door dog isn't being dramatic or demanding. They are, in the only language available to them, not but expressing that they have been excluded from something that their entire social architecture treats as communal. It doesn't mean you can never eat alone. It doesn't mean every meal needs to become a group event. But it does mean that if your dog is consistently excluded from family mealtimes without any alternative form of connection, without something that says, in effect, you are still part of this, even when you're not in the room, that exclusion can compound over time in ways that show up as separation-related anxiety in other contexts. The practical answer here is beautifully simple. If you want your dog out of the meal space, for any reason, and all reasons are valid, set them up before you sit down. A stuffed Kong, a lick mat, a long-lasting chew. Give them something to do before the ritual begins, or not as a distraction from being excluded, but as their own version of the shared activity. In many dogs, this reframe alone dissolves the door-scratching behavior entirely within days, because the underlying need, something to do while the pack is doing something, has been met. What we've been circling around this whole time, through every one of these points, is something that underpins all of it. Something about what your dog is actually trying to confirm every single time they show up at your feet with those steady, patient eyes. And it's the kind of thing that once you hear it framed clearly, you probably won't think about mealtimes the same way again. Think back to the very beginning of your dog's life. Back before they were yours, back before your home, and your voice and your smell were the center of their world. The first relationship a dog ever has is built entirely around food. Their mother fed them. She was warmth and sustenance and safety all at once before they had any other way to understand the world. And in the emotional wiring that formed in those earliest weeks, being fed and being loved and being safe were not three separate things. They were one thing, a single, unified experience of the world being okay. When your dog came home, you stepped into that role. You became the one who fills the bowl. And every bowl you have ever filled has registered not just as food, it has registered as confirmation. You are my person. I am wanted here. This is where I belong. Now think about what your dog is actually doing when they sit near you and watch you eat. Or they are watching the most important figure in their emotional life, the person around whom their entire sense of safety is organized, doing the thing that, at the deepest level of their nervous system, is associated with love. They are not observing a meal, they are bearing witness to the ongoing proof that their world is intact. And when you look back at them, or when you catch their eye and soften, or reach a hand down, or say their name gently, you are not accidentally rewarding begging. You are answering a question they ask you every single day in 100 quiet ways. The question that lives in the head on your knee and the following you into every room, and the waiting by the door, and yes, the watching you eat. The question is, am I still yours? And your answer, every time you acknowledge them, yes, yet every time you make space for them in an ordinary moment of your day, is the only answer that really matters to them. The yes. The still yes. What's beautiful about this, and I think it's genuinely beautiful, is that the answer doesn't require grand gestures. It doesn't require changing your routine or your training approach or your rules about the table. It just requires a little awareness, a moment of knowing what you're actually looking at when your dog appears the second you sit down. Not a beggar, not a manipulator, not a dog with bad manners, just a dog asking a quiet question in the only language they have. And if you want to keep going deeper into the quiet conversations happening between you and your dog every day, the ones most owners never fully tune into, we have a lot more where this came from. Or the next video looks at something your dog does every time you come home and what they're really saying with that greeting. It's not what most people think. Take good care of them. Every look is a question, and every kindness is an answer. And once you understand that meal times are your dog's way of checking the bond is still intact, you'll start to notice they're asking the same question somewhere else too. Somewhere you walk past every single day without fully hearing it. You came into this video thinking your dog was begging, and in a way that framing isn't completely wrong, but it was only ever the surface of something much older, much quieter, and honestly much more moving than that. What your dog has been doing every time they appear at your feet during a meal isn't about hunger, it's about you. I'm the relaxed version of you they only get to see a few times a day. The stillness that tells them the world is working the way it should. The confirmation, repeated every evening, that they are still part of something. Still safe, still loved, still yours. You haven't just been sharing mealtimes with your dog. You've been answering one of the most important questions they know how to ask. So here's the one thing to try today. Just once, at your next meal. When your dog shows up and watches you, look back at them. Warmly, hold it for a few seconds. No food, no fuss, just that. Notice what happens in their body when you do. That moment of mutual attention is, according to the research, one of the most genuine forms of connection the two of you can share. And it costs nothing. Now, with this kind of deep dive into the quiet language between you and your dog is what you're looking for, Perfect Living is the place to be. We go this deep every week. No fluff, no fear, just the real stuff that changes how you see your dog. Subscribe and come join us. Take good care of them. They are paying very close attention to you, and now a little more, so are you. Goodbye, and see you in our next video.